Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com for show notes and click support to join our community for exclusive access to patron-only episodes, special features, merchandise, and other membership perks. This is Joe Saponari of CyMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigman of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. Thanks for listening.
So just before we started recording, you and I, Joe, were discussing how we've been using Microsoft as our email service provider for a lot of our clients. I've been doing that recently. I've done 4 or 5 migrations of different size groups. And before that, I was regularly recommending my clients to go to Rackspace. And I had my own business with Rackspace. They were great. They do hosted exchange. Sometimes you run into these clients who are very adverse. When the words Microsoft leaves your lips, they're completely rooted out and offended. And they're like, oh, we don't know, Bill Gates, he's this, he's that. And I'm like, well, no. This is nothing about Bill Gates. We're talking about a blue chip email service provider. But my biggest gripe with Rackspace, and I had their premium tier, which is the hosted exchange, they have no accommodation for 2-factor authentication.
Oh, that's crazy.
Can you believe that?
By today's standards, that's just, it's table stakes, as they say. You know, you kind of have to have it. I can't believe they still don't have it to this day.
It's 2022. How could you run a service, even if you use Fastmail out of Australia, they've implemented 2-factor authentication. I just think it's a non-starter.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's kind of crazy. I mean, is that the reason you switched? Because I know you've been using Rackspace for a while and their support has always been great. I mean, we even interviewed someone from the company, I think, on the show a while back. You know, they're great, reputable company, but
yeah, you could still get a live person on the phone from Texas and they'll help you out. And what was the impetus for me moving towards Microsoft, or one of the reasons, was the 2-factor, but also with my own email, I was getting more and more spam, and I would call up and, usually, we all get those false positives where we have to review our spam folder, and like, sure enough, here's somebody brand new who's looking for support, and you realize that it's not a perfect system, so you're always going to get false positives. But I was just getting all kinds of junk mail in my inbox, and I logged into the control panel on Rackspace and saw that my email filtering was turned on. So I reached out to them, and they're like, yeah, well, we've recently been like moving our infrastructure around, and we changed servers and we've had problems. Really?
Did they tell you to submit a ticket? I know that's your kryptonite, is if they say, can you submit a ticket, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we're sorry. They were very apologetic. They didn't really have any solutions. They said, please report any spam that you get. So almost like asking me to submit a ticket, right. Help us make it better. It's like, no, I'm paying you. It should be better. I shouldn't have to help you make it better, for goodness sakes. Anyway, so that was the real push for me. And then, the 2-factor thing, it was just a complete non-starter. But I've had a very successful migration. The great thing about moving to Outlook or Exchange hosted by Microsoft is you can get your mailboxes down to $5 a mailbox, which is astounding. Yeah. You don't have to pay the standard $7 that a lot of companies are charging. You can go to a higher tier with Microsoft and get a little bit more features built in, like OneDrive and Teams and some add-on features, and even pay even more and get the full Microsoft Office suite. But you could get hosted exchange for $5 a person. Have you encountered that as well?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I mean, you really, like you said, you can't beat that price. And it's pretty much industry standard. I mean, I always go back to some famous quote about like, no one ever got fired for recommending IBM. That was the saying, like back in the day, when PC clones came out. And then, of course, Apple, Macs came out and things. If you go with the tried and true industry standard, it's kind of a no-brainer, and you're not going against the grain. You could never be criticized for going with that vendor. And in this case, they're kind of the go-to for email hosting. It's crazy to think about, like, companies used to run their own servers. We used to manage them for clients. We used to go with third parties, like you said, Rackspace or Cario. These days, it's like, just go with the specialists. I mean, they're there to support it when you need it. And they also happen to be pretty much the cheapest you can find. So how could you go wrong with Microsoft hosting?
Except the fact that Bill Gates is involved and he's injecting people with the virus. But,
Right,
if you could look past that, you're all set.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to just point out was that it's not a walk in the park, moving anybody, because you're playing fast and loose with people's data. So I always have some trepidation when I take on a migration project, and I make sure to account for enough time. Recently, we did 2 legal firms. And most recently, we did an environmental management company. They were kind of interesting because they had what I thought was the GoDaddy hosted exchange that they resell from Microsoft. And I thought that was going to be a big hoo-ha because there's actually articles written on this, and it's called Defederating Godaddy 365. I've never done one. I thought that was going to be what I had to do. But interestingly, I had a whole different set of problems when I moved this environmental company. Basically, the problem existed because the name of the company was myenvironment.com. And what they had done is, through probably my guidance, was they had signed up for family accounts, Microsoft Office family accounts, instead of like a business account. And so they would get the 5 licenses. And you're not supposed to do that technically, but I think a lot of people do that. But they had used their domain, myenvironmentalcompany.com. And so when I went to start to claim the domain by putting in a text record in the DNS, I got a message back saying the domain was already in use. Well, that's really weird because all they've done is they signed up for Microsoft Office accounts. But that's kind of like a gotcha.
Well, I had a similar thing recently. I don't know if it's the same issue, but I see where so you're saying, like, if they've used essentially work email to buy a Microsoft Office subscription, like Microsoft 365 Family or something, but they log in using their email address with their company domain.
That's right.
Okay.
I got this message saying the domain myenvironmentalcompany.com is an unmanaged tenant. And what this means is that where your domain is currently being held does not currently have a global administrator. Well, I'm like, how the heck do I get a global administrator? So Microsoft does have numbers that you can call for support. I talked to a couple people. They do a lot of their customer support offshore. It was a little bit of a struggle, but the way I was able to claim it, I had to go and sign up for something called Power BI. Have you ever run across this?
I don't think so.
It's the craziest thing. So Power BI, can you hear the cat?
I heard the cat, yeah. Nice. Outtakes.
Knucklehead, yeah. So Power BI, if you go to their webpage, it says, quickly find meaningful insights within your data that helps make business decisions or easily build rich visual analytic reports. You can try Power BI for free. And by doing that, it allowed me to claim the domain and become a global administrator. I almost wanted to say to the person who gave me this guidance from Microsoft, I actually got it through an email. None of the phone support could sort this one out. Evidently, they hadn't seen it. And I can't believe that because I would imagine there's lots of people. Maybe people just throw up their hands in disgust or change the email address for those Office accounts. Who the heck knows?
Yeah.
That seemed to do it. I became global administrator by signing up for this free service, or at least this temporarily free service called Power BI through Microsoft. And then I was able to, put in my text record and add all my users. But otherwise, I was locked out.
Wow. That almost reminds me of, that I think I've mentioned on the show, the little workaround if you need support from Facebook, they won't talk to you. There's no support for, free accounts from Facebook. But if you buy their, now they own Oculus, so they, you can buy an Oculus product and then you can get Facebook support to help you with like your Facebook account, essentially, if you get locked out or something like that. But it almost reminds me of that, where you kind of need to do this like workaround to get some kind of support. I can't imagine how that's connected. We had one like that. I think it sounds like the same issue. I kind of started it and then Tim finished it. We have the whole process for migrating to Microsoft, basically from whatever they're on. And we had a client who was on Hover for domain registration and email hosting. I like Hover for domain registration. I hadn't really used them for email hosting. And in the course of work with this client over the past couple of months, they've had several cases where the email was just down. The email shouldn't really go down that often. often. I mean, it should be a very rare exception. So let's get you migrated to proper provider. So of course, we recommended Microsoft. And I got it all started, set it up with an account that Microsoft creates on Microsoft.com kind of.
Right.
So I did that part, got the account set it up in Migration Wiz. I think you're a fan of that like I am, where you can just migrate pretty much from any server to any other server.
From BitTitan.
Yeah, exactly. BitTitan product.
Company.
Yep. And it works really well. And so, I got that all set up and going, and I migrated the email to the new Microsoft account. Some time lapsed. And then when the client was ready to actually proceed with finalizing the migration, changing the DNS records, making the actual switch, it was scheduled with Tim. Now, I had left off where I didn't actually verify the domain. I just figured I'll just get to this few hours before, we make the switch. That's what we usually do. It became Tim's problem. When he went to pick up where I left off, he said, "Hey, did you ever verify the domain?" No. And so he went in to do that, and he found that essentially ran into the same issue you had, which is he verified the domain, and that way the email addresses were created for the new user with their correct email address, not the temporary account anymore. So then he had to hook up the Migration Wiz account to be able to do the final pass of the migration, and it kept failing. So Migration Wiz support came back and said, yeah, the problem is they have two Microsoft accounts, which when you go to Microsoft, to log in, it'll ask you, is this a personal account or a business account or work or school, kind of thing. And so if they have a personal account for Microsoft Office, their licenses, which is the same email address as now the new work account, essentially, their main admin login for the new service. You can't do a Migration Wiz migration if that's the case. So we had to actually change the personal Microsoft account to a different email address in order to let the migration proceed. And then afterwards, we were actually able to go back and just change it back to use the same email address. Ideally, he'd have a Gmail or some other third party personal email address to use for that Microsoft account, the personal account. But I don't think he did, so we just changed it back afterwards. And that all worked. That was a little gotcha that we hadn't encountered yet.
In some cases, you do need to temporarily move the client to the onmicrosoftdomain.com address for the multiple passes that you'll do with Migration Wiz. Other times you don't. So with this most recent one that I spoke of earlier, it was able to handle the domain because I used the Microsoft migration utility built in to the admin control panel through Microsoft. It all depends. Sometimes the BitTitan thing is great. But in this case, I think we had something like 25 users that we had to move over. BitTitan can get a little expensive for one single migration. If you build it into your quote or you tell the client ahead of time, I said, well, what the heck? Let me give this migration tool, this migration utility built into Microsoft. And that worked just great. One of the reasons why it's sometimes good to look at that, and this didn't happen most recently, but it's happened with some other migrations I've done, where I've actually had to use the Mac version of PowerShell. And at this point, I know far too much about PowerShell, but I had to invoke something called impersonation mode.
I've heard of that. Okay.
Yeah, management role assignment role application impersonation. So as an administrator, push the data to all these different email accounts. But I didn't have to do it this time. I didn't have to use PowerShell. If you do indeed work inside the migration utility for Microsoft, and it's really not that bad. It's just as straightforward as the one from BitTitan. You can avoid having to do some PowerShell commands. BitTitan does have support documentation for invoking PowerShell. So I think in one case, this sounds really crazy. I had to go into a VM that I had on a client that was running Windows and run PowerShell from there to get the permissions to allow the migration. You can really get off in the weeds. And so that's why anybody who's listening, it's just a really good idea to build some extra time in there for these missions.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with that just in general. It is surprising how kind of off the rails it can be sometimes. I mean, here we are, promoting and singing the praises of Microsoft, but I've had cases where what I think is a totally normal, there's no extenuating circumstances, just set them up with a brand new Microsoft account, do a migration like normal. I've had cases where I've created the addresses and then I go in and two of them I can't verify in the initial pre-stage migration or just verifying the credentials even in Migration Wiz. I'll go through it, try it a few times, try it the next day, no luck, reach out to Microsoft support. What's going on with these two accounts? I can't seem to figure it out. And they'll say, we'll try a command on our side that's going to push it out again.
why would that be necessary? All I did was create an account like I do with all the accounts. You just type in the name. Like there's nothing different about this. Why would this sometimes just not work, on their side? And it's just been weird like that. And so, yeah, that becomes follow-up that I have to do with Microsoft and like wait to hear back from them. And so it's really always good, like you said, to have a little bit of extra time kind of built in case it goes sideways like that. But once it's set up, it's been really good. The one downside that I've seen, this goes to like our evolving best practices for setting this stuff up. But it used to be, like you mentioned, two-factor earlier, it used to be that you would just set up the initial user, and sometimes there's only one or two users, and that initial user is the admin account. That's the user at jim@companyname.com. They are their own admin account for their own email. What do users do? They use terrible passwords. They type them in wherever they feel like it, half paying attention. So eventually a password gets compromised or phished or whatever. Their account gets hacked into, and suddenly, quote unquote, hackers are in their account. The simple scenario, they're just sending spam, and then you find out because the account gets blocked or something, and then you just go out and you fish them out and change the password. But in other cases, they can start to try to like intercept invoice emails or payment emails and try to steal money from your clients and stuff. So best practice these days is not to allow the user to be an admin on their account, a global admin. Instead, it's best to create a separate email address that's not licensed, so it doesn't have to have an email license. You don't even tell the client what that password is ideally. I don't like to do that where I have an account, they don't have access to it, but it's kind of for their own good. And of course, they own the domain, so they could always prove their identity and get back in if they needed to. But in most cases, like the client just wants us to take care of it anyway. So that's the way we handle it. We might make them a help desk admin so they can like reset other users' passwords or something like that. But we typically don't make the client a global admin. We set up our own login for their service to be an admin. And of course, two-factor across the board is now pretty standard as well.
That's a great point. And it's very easy to do in Microsoft. That's a real good tip. As you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, how sometimes you have your clients will say, I could have never done this without you. I don't know how I could have done this myself. And most times you're thinking to yourself, well, it's really not that hard. But when you start doing stuff like this, you're right. You could have never done this because I barely got through it.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's the classic example of, you could muddle through it. It'll take you hours to read these best practices and like get on the phone with Microsoft. And it took me hours sometimes. So imagine it'll take the client 10 times that,
I doubt it. I think all of them would do a mic drop and just walk away.
Right.
But you bring up another interesting point. I'm finding more and more that things are shifting in a direction where the client does want us to take care of more and more of these things. I recently have been dealing with a medical practice for a number of years. At one point, we insisted on them having cloud backup, local backup and cloud backup. There was a point where they said, well, we want to be in control of our cloud backups. Sure, that sounds great to me. Here you go. This is what we recommend. Use, I think at the time, Physicians Machine, we put them on Crash Plan Business, and the rest of the office went on Backblaze. Just recently, they came back to me just as an example, and they're like, we don't look at the emails. If we get the emails, we don't even pay attention to them. And we just want to be sure that if something blows up, we're going to be able to get a copy of it. Let us take care of it. They're like, great. Let's switch all the admin accounts to you, and you just handle it for us. I think things are shifting in that direction.
That's fantastic, because every few years we start to worry, this stuff is going to become too simple and, there won't be any need for us consultants anymore. And, that's always way overblown, and clients always need us. It's a good sign if you're finding that your clients are ready to hand that off to you and kind of let you take responsibility for it. Of course, it makes sense, from the perspective of, as they said, they're ignoring this stuff anyway, and they don't know how to respond, even if they do read it. Half the time I get somebody forwarding me an email and I'm like, I can't say it any better than the email already says it. Like, you want me to interpret this for you? Like, they forward me something, question mark? And I'm just like, I can't say it any better. I'm literally going to copy and paste whatever the vendor said and, maybe like take out some of the fluff, cut to the chase, but like, there's not much to it. It is nice they are willing to, to essentially pay you to do that. But I wonder sometimes too about like, how do you walk the line? I don't want to take full responsibility. Your data isn't safe with me kind of thing. Like, you'll never lose data because you've hired me to take responsibility for it. I would love to be able to promise that, but like, somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm like, don't promise that. Don't fully take responsibility for their data. I don't know. Is there any harm in just saying, sure, I'll watch your backups for you. I'll monitor it. I'll make sure it's running.
You become the gatekeeper. If the gate breaks, the heathens trample the gate down. They really can't blame you because you didn't make the gate. You just stood there and made sure that the gate was locked. So because we're doing a lot of this monitoring stuff, it is once removed, and the finger of blame somewhat gets pointed to you, but you could always just point over your shoulder and go like, it's over there,
Yeah, that's true. It reminds me of like, oh, it's a known issue. Sometimes you set up a new computer and then they have like an issue that comes up later. You told me to buy this computer. Like, can you just fix every issue that happens now for the next 2 weeks? And look, I'm sorry. I mean, that's a known issue. I didn't make the software, Yeah. So you kind of always do have, I don't want to say like, somebody else to point the blame at, but I mean, that's basically true. What's the scenario that I'm worried about? I don't know. I guess like I'm thinking Backblaze, for example. If their email account gets hacked, by default, anybody with access to the client's email, has keys to the kingdom. They could go in and delete the backups or, exfiltrate the data or something like that, unless you use a private encryption key, which most people don't. And that's probably a good thing, because if they do use a private encryption key, then I can't help them if they lose access to that. So for the ones I manage for client servers and things, I maintain that for the client. I make sure I have the private encryption key in case that comes up if I want it to be extra secure. But for other clients where it's just a residential user that sets it up through Backblaze with the default settings, I can't guarantee that somebody can't get into your backups or can't destroy your backups if your email gets hacked. There's only so much we can do. I guess it's fine to take responsibility for at least notifying them if there's a problem that, comes to your attention, like a machine stops backing up or something.
And there's certain things that we don't even have control of. With this same office that I mentioned, the physician, he was using Google Authenticator. He moved to a new phone. And like Sam described a couple weeks back, he forgot to take his Google Authenticator credentials. And now we can't get into the Crash Plan account. There's always problems along the way that clients are going to have. So we can do our best to try to help them from hurting themselves. But sometimes it's out of your care, custody, and control, and you just do the best you can.
I know. I guess that's kind of the thing I worry about. Like in that scenario, let's say you have this relationship with the client where they're letting you respond to the emails that come in about their backups, like this hasn't backed up or this needs an update or something, or, monitoring it. And then something like this happens. I mean, your machine's backing up and, there's no problem there. But then you try to go into your backups and it turns out you need the two-factor code and you don't have it. What if they come back to you and say, I thought you were taking care of our backups, and then you have to explain to them, well, this is your problem, that you need to be maintaining access to the two-factor authentication app. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's kind of an edge case, and you just have to explain it if it comes up. I guess I just worry about any kind of exposure, with that. I had the same thing happen yesterday, actually. A client got in touch saying, I need to renew my Squarespace account, and I can't log in. It's the darndest thing. And so typical, like just the password on record wasn't working. So we went to reset it. Sure enough, he gets the email, no problem. Pick a new password. Let Safari generate it. Great. You create a new password and you get to step 2, which is you still need the two-factor authentication code, right? Check your app. Do you have an app on your phone? Look on your phone. We don't have a record of this. We didn't help you set this up. So look on your phone. And he's like, I see one. It's called WhatsApp. I'm like, nope. That's, keep going.
No,
and,
that's not it. No.
That's not the one. Oh, here's one, Authenticator. Okay, good. Open that up. And then, he opens it and it says no tokens or whatever. Basically no account. So it's the scenario you're describing where he must have gotten a new phone in the last year or two and previously set this up on his old phone. Like you said, it happened to Sam. I could see this happening to me too. It happens to the best of us. I mean, forget about clients. They're never going to think of that before they set up a new phone. And maybe it's our fault, because he got a new phone and we helped him set it up. Maybe we should have said, do you have any authentication apps? Now, in that case, we were able to go to Squarespace and say, hey, this happened. And they have a form you fill out. Form says, we need a copy of your driver's license and we need your full name and maybe a company name and whatever relevant stuff. And in their case, if it weren't related to two-factor, they also ask for like your credit card statement with the Squarespace, charges and just different ways to confirm. And so they have a kind of way to get back in. And that worked out just fine. We ended up setting him up with text message authentication for two-factor. So we turned off the authentication app because he's just going to end up in this same scenario in like a year or two when he gets a new phone. And I just see this becoming a major issue in our industry. I think that this is going to happen to more and more clients, and it's going to create larger and larger problems because some of these services may not have a way in. Like imagine if Backblaze was protected with an authentication app in the same sense that a private encryption key would provide essentially like assurance that you can't get into this data unless you have this info. There may not be a way to reset that in some cases. So you might just need to like delete your account with the service and start over, if there's no backdoor that the company has. So what are we going to do? Yeah, that's going to happen. And I don't know, there's not really a good way to work around it.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is I had mentioned this on the show is you don't necessarily need the app on your phone. Actually, if you're using Google Chrome, and I wanted to talk to you about Google Chrome in a moment, there's an extension you could download that only works with Chrome, and it'll do the authentication. It'll scan the QR code. Maybe the client needs it for just one thing. I have an elderly client. She uses Dashlane. That was our solution, not for her to run around with another app on her phone to lose. So, but what I wanted to kind of circle back was you had mentioned this on previous shows where, and I echo your sentiment, I'm enthusiastic about it too, using the Apple keychain when they suggest passwords, and it's becoming more and more accessible for people to find that, of course, in Monterey and system preferences, they can see their passwords. Oh, and a great thing that just came on the Mac admin Slack was somebody mentioned if you go into the passwords extension in system preferences, you can export the entire database to a CSV file.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that. That's an interesting tip. I'm almost a little concerned. I hope somebody doesn't figure out how to script that, and like just dump everybody's passwords again, like the old keychain bugs. But
here's my question to you, Joe, because I know you have all the answers. Okay. What do you do? And there's many clients like this. They love Chrome. And they're storing their passwords in Chrome. Chrome, for the most part, I don't think they suggest passwords, and it's not universal in the keychain, and it doesn't, obviously sync to other devices. What do you do? You tell them like, you don't want to use Chrome. Chrome's garbage. You can't do that, right?
Right. Well, I mean, listen, I can be very convincing. So I talk to clients and I say, look, I recommend Safari for your day-to-day web browsing. I said, it's great to have Chrome. In fact, some websites will only support Chrome. I don't like to tell them, there's some websites that only work in Chrome. Because it's pretty rare, actually, but like the Unify portal and stuff like that, which doesn't apply to clients anyway. Have Chrome. That's good to have as a backup. I mean, of course, I'll mention the battery life angle. And I don't know if this is always the case or still the case. I think it changes sometimes, but I'm pretty sure Safari gets much better battery life for just general web browsing. Sometimes that may not always be the case for certain sites. Of course, you get that banner at the top that says this website is using, extra power. And there's certain sites that you can, if you leave them open too long in Safari, they kind of slow down or whatever. I'm not sure if that's just a bug in Safari or with this, certain sites in Safari. But I think in general, it's probably fair to say that using Safari will help you get better battery life, especially on the latest Macs, rather than using Chrome. I don't belabor that too much, but I think that's a pretty convincing one for a lot of people just to kind of mention you'll probably get better battery life.
So you just make up stuff to scare them away from Chrome.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, at least it has been true at various times.
Do you think Bill Gates is involved in injections when they're putting tracking information in these injections that he's invented?
Right. Yeah. Well, if you don't use Chrome, then the injection tracking.
Okay. Good point.
You're safe,
yeah.
Right.
All right.
So
please continue.
Just layer the conspiracy theories on, depending on what's going to convince them. But I mean, Safari is first party. It's made by Apple. It's it's just built in. It's easy for me to recommend, and so I don't find it that hard to convince people. And then again, if they want to use Chrome, that's fine. I'm also not going to insist that they use Safari. But I do like to promote the built-in password management so here's a benefit that you don't get from Chrome. If you're using Safari on the Mac and Safari on the iPhone for your web browsing, and you have iCloud Keychain, the passwords that you save, let's say on Amazon.com on your Mac, sync to the phone. So if you visit Amazon.com there, of course, the password can autofill. But moreover, those passwords are also available to the apps that you have on the phone. So you're not going to use Amazon.com, you're going to use the Amazon app. And your Amazon password can be filled in for the Amazon app because Apple knows that this Amazon app is official and it's associated with Amazon.com. So in other words, the phone handles that kind of security layer. So that's a nice benefit to using the built-in system of storing passwords in the keychain. Now, going back to Chrome, as you mentioned, Chrome does have a password manager built in, and that's fine if they're using that and they're comfortable with that and they only use Chrome on their various devices or whatever. I think it does suggest passwords, or that can be turned on if it's not on by default. And you can go into like Chrome preferences and, look up passwords there, and that's all well and good. So you can train them in kind of the same functions, but it's not as nice as you said, like built into system preferences. Now, one thing I did notice that I put on my list to mention on the show, a nice tip is that Safari can import passwords from Chrome, and it works really well. I mean, they can import bookmarks, they can import passwords. I mean, those would be the main things for me. So if somebody has been using Chrome and maybe has some bookmarks, but more importantly, has stored passwords in Chrome, you can literally just quit Chrome, open Safari. In the Safari, I think it's the file menu, you can import from Chrome. And it'll ask you, of course, for like the keychain password to unlock Chrome's private data in the keychain to basically allow Safari to just like grab those passwords that you've previously saved in Chrome. And it works great. It's a great way to populate somebody's keychain if you're getting them on board with this whole security upgrade.
Yeah, that is a nice tip. My only reason for thinking about bringing this up on the show is sometimes it's hard to make that case when you're up to your neck in alligators. So you're there and you're on site and you're trying to drain the swamp and you're trying to make things better, and you find that they're using Chrome, and it's maybe not the right time for that conversation. So I think that's another thing that's potentially problematic is, if you just had to sit down with them and you were just kicking the can down the road, but a lot of times you're in the heat of battle, and this is probably not most efficient for you to use this app, but we're too busy to even talk about that right now. So
yeah, exactly. You've got to pick your battles sometimes. And that's a hard one to say like, well, just change your whole web browser. I mean, they're probably comfortable with it.
Because people love Chrome. I don't know what it is. They love it. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I've heard that a few times recently, like, oh, my kids told me, Mom, like, you have to use Chrome. Like, what are you doing? It's funny because, your kids 2 years ago might have told you to use Firefox times.
No, Grandpa tells you to use the Foxfire. I use Foxfire.
Yeah. I see Opera on computers sometimes. I'm like, did you install malware? Like, where did Opera come from? Like, it's like that's a pretty obscure one. I find success with just, maybe I'm underselling it, but like I try to tell them, yeah, you're going to be happier with Safari. Just use that. Think of Safari as your default and have Chrome as a backup. And one of the main issues is, again, the password stuff. So if I'm getting them on board with that, they're willing to try Safari in light of that.
Okay, I just wanted you to weigh in on this because I know it came up after the show. I was listening back while I was editing, and I'm like, yeah, but what about all those Chrome people?
If they want to use Chrome on their Mac and they have a PC and they're using Microsoft, I don't know what it's called, Edge or something, and on their iPhone, they're going to use Safari. If they're in different browsers on different devices and they have Windows in the mix or, God forbid, they have Android in the mix too, then I'm going to recommend a password manager, a third-party one. Our go-to would be 1Password, or obviously there's Dashlane and LastPass and a few others. But those are great where they do insist on using multiple different browsers or different devices, Windows and Mac and Android. Then you have to use a third-party one anyway. So I don't really care what web browser you're using. If you're going to use 1Password, it'll just integrate with everything.
Speaking of 1Password, I use 1Password. I've been using it for a long time. And if you're an ACN, you get a free Teams account, and that's great. And we love Agile Bits. And I never want to drag them down the road. But I recently tried to reach out to them because I had this frustrating case of, and maybe it's one of those TLDNR, too long did not read, but I've got two browser extensions in my Safari, and one looks like the 1Password icon and has a lock on it, and the other one just looks like the 1Password icon. And I can't figure out which one I need. I tried to get rid of one, and I thought like, well, maybe, do you know what's going on here? Because it's like all over the place.
Yeah, I've seen weird stuff with them for the last two versions. I mean, this is an example of a company, I don't want to drag them either because they've been great and they're good to the ACN. But, I think they took on a lot of funding recently and they're making a big play in the enterprise and stuff. And for years, I mean, I complained about 2 years ago about how like secure notes, kind of went sideways. And
sure.
You can't Command F search in a note without clicking edit first. I mean, that's just a huge pet peeve of mine. I want to just like Command F, find the thing I'm looking for. I don't want to go into edit mode. I'm not editing the note. I'm just looking to read it. The other thing they did was they started to like just, we quote unquote support markdown in notes. I'm like, I've never used that feature. I don't know what that is. I don't care. It's like, I do know what it is, but I don't really want to use it. And they just started to like default to enabling, anywhere that there might be markdown code in my notes, my existing notes that look a certain way before version 7 or whatever. Now markdown changes what they show. So there's some passwords that I've typed into secure notes that suddenly, like, if you copy and paste it, it's the wrong thing because they change like an asterisk to be instead of bold or so. Whatever.
Right.
So it's just, it's like, don't change my notes, guys.
Thank you, John Gruber.
I like Markdown. That's great. But like, I didn't use it on purpose.
I didn't ask for it.
Right. So there's been annoying things like that too.
Sign up for this. I didn't get the memo. I'm sorry. I just can't think you just keep rattling on more.
Yeah. All those things apply.
Yeah. They're moving fast and they're breaking things is what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. The Mark Zuckerberg playbook, applied to your passwords, which is just not a great approach.
So do you have 2 icons in your Safari
No,
menu?
I don't, but I've seen that. So one of the issues is like it used to be that you'd install the Safari extension for 1Password and it would say something like app required. I know, I have the app. The app is great. Like I want the extension. That's why I downloaded it.
Right.
Because they started creating, I guess, I don't know, some people just want to like only install the extension, I guess, and like not install the app for some reason. I'm not really sure. But then, so they have the new version of the extension is like a full-fledged 1Password client. So you like open the extension for the first time and you sign in to 1Password in the extension. The app is not required, which is fine if you have, like you said, a 1Password Teams account or business account where like you have a 1Password account and that's the only place your passwords are is in your 1Password account. I'm a long-time 1Password user. I still have a vault that syncs through Dropbox, and I have clients that have similar setups of other alternative syncing methods, not just syncing through 1Password accounts. If you have this new extension that is a 1Password client itself, that doesn't have all those other features. It just syncs with 1Password accounts. And so you only have access to like your 1Password vaults, your 1Password account vaults in that extension. So for a while, like that was a feature for, I think, Firefox and Chrome. And so when I had clients that needed that for Firefox and Chrome, but had local vaults or vaults syncing through Dropbox, there is a way to download the old version of the extension, which quote unquote requires the app, which is again, like what you want because it's the app that manages access to those other vaults. So there's essentially 2 different versions of the 1Password extension, one that comes with the latest version of the 1Password app, and one that I think you can download separately. I have seen that issue. And the other thing I've seen is when you go to update the app through the App Store version, it gives you an error saying like, please quit 1Password, or I forget. There's some crazy thing. And like if Safari's running, it can't update the app. Or if you update the app, the extension suddenly can't talk to the app anymore. And you have to like reconfigure it. I don't know what that is. It seems like a bug, but I've seen that too with the extension. So they made it something that was working consistently well and just made it kind of not great.
Right. Well, that's interesting because one of my clients uses Dashlane, one of the few. Dashlane recently sunsetted the Mac app. And so you can still use it with your browser, but the browser just connects to the web view of Dashlane, and that's the way they go down the highway. So maybe they're trying to do some sort of a compromise where some people who don't want to have the app on their computer just want to have it connect to the web, like a web-based app. And so this is probably what's going on, but it's not great. How about this? Have you seen this crazy thing? Now, I'm running Monterey, just the regular release version of it, where I'm in Safari, right? Because that's almost exclusively what I use. It's not related to this, but through accessibility, I have a hotkey. And if I do a if I hold down the hotkey and do a 2-finger swipe upward, downward, I could zoom in and zoom out. I'm old, right? So I can read the type better if I zoom in. Have you just been in like at Amazon or something like that, and all of a sudden the page does a crazy zoom? I'm trying every finger combination, 4-finger compress, 3-finger, this, that, to try to get the page to normalize, pressing command minus, and it doesn't work, where it's just in this crazy zoomed situation. Has that happened to you?
Huh. I don't know that I've seen an issue where you can't fix it. So I'm very comfortable with the Command 0 shortcut in Safari, to like zoom back to 100% zoom. I don't know how many times I've hit Command plus by accident, and it's 2 or 3, and I just hit Command 0 to go back to like normal zoom. I do use that sometimes. I have seen this issue with clients where all kinds of gestures, they end up swiping backwards or forwards and accidentally, leaving the page and this and that. And so I don't like when the solution is just like turn off the feature, like you just have to go into the trackpad gestures and like turn off those features. But essentially that sometimes just is the solution when somebody is having that problem.
I have clients who just hold the power button and they turn off the computer and put it back on, and then it fixes itself. It's okay now.
Problem solved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you still have clients who don't know the correct way to shut down? I don't know. I try restarting all the time. I end up having to do that all the time. How are you restarting? The button on the back. That's not good. Like you're not supposed to do that.
They say something like, I try to shut it down or try to restart and it won't restart. It'll take a long time. So I just pull down the power button until it turns off. Like that's their solution.
You're making the problem worse, by doing that too much.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, maybe it has to do with the junky external drive that you have plugged into it that hasn't been working for 3 years. Did you ever think that might have done that?
Right. Or the computer's, from 2012. So, maybe time to replace it.
I use the analogy for people. When you do that, it's like, the old-fashioned ice house where you have a square block of ice. I said, it's like you're taking an ice pick and you're just jamming it in, taking off all the square edges of your perfectly square block of ice. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, right. I was thinking, like, where's that metaphor coming from? That's an interesting one.
Well,
but,
it's,
I guess
your computer's, your computer's supposed to be perfectly square. And every time you jab it with the ice pick, the equivalent of powering it down, you're compromising it. It's not a square anymore. It's just jumble of mush.
Yeah. I just say it's like pulling the plug, yanking the plug out of the back unexpectedly. And I always explain,
right. But they do that all the time. That's like the normal
they're like, so
behavior.
what? They're like, I thought I was supposed to. Like,
I do that with the toaster.
Again. Right. Well, I explained to them, maybe there's some process behind the scenes that's saving something, some system data. And you might be, halfway through saving it. Now, you pulled the plug in the middle of just about to write the last 1 or 0 there. And, you interrupted that. And so now, there's incomplete data. Next time it goes to read that data, it's like, what's this? And then everything falls apart. Usually it can make the point. Basically it's also like, just don't do that. I don't care what you have to do. Like, how do I have to convince you not to do it? It's going to make things worse. Don't hold the button down. Just use the Apple menu. This is not hard. Yeah.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins